Maria was an ordinary woman living in a small town where everyone knew everyone. She was not the kind of person people noticed when she walked by. She wore simple clothes, usually faded dresses that had seen many years, and her shoes were always clean but old. She tied her hair in a loose bun and carried a small brown bag that held her lunch and a few coins. Every morning she walked to the community center where she worked as a cleaner, moving quietly through the halls before anyone else arrived. Maria liked her work. It was not glamorous, but it gave her peace. She enjoyed the sound of her broom brushing across the floor, the smell of freshly wiped tables, and the way sunlight poured through the dusty windows. She felt proud when everything looked neat and calm, like her small contribution made the world a little better. People in town often greeted her politely, but few truly talked to her. To most, she was just Maria the cleaner, someone who smiled, nodded, and went about her duties. Yet those who paid attention might have noticed that her smile carried warmth, and her eyes, though tired, held kindness and something deeper, a kind of quiet strength that came from a life of endurance. She lived alone in a small rented room above a bakery. The smell of fresh bread often woke her before sunrise, reminding her to get ready for another long day. Her landlord, an old widow, liked her because she never caused trouble and always paid rent on time. Maria didn't own much: a small bed, a wooden chair, a radio that sometimes worked, and an old photograph of her younger self sitting at a piano. That picture was her secret treasure, a window into a part of her life she rarely spoke about. In her younger days, Maria had dreamed of being a pianist. Her father used to say her fingers were born to dance on the keys. She studied music at a small school when she was a girl, spending hours practicing scales and melodies. Her teachers said she had a natural gift. But when her mother fell ill, and her younger siblings needed care, Maria left her studies to help at home. Life moved quickly after that, and dreams quietly slipped away like forgotten songs. Even so, Maria never lost her love for music. Sometimes, when she was cleaning the community center, she would pause near the old piano in the corner of the hall. Its black paint was chipped, and many keys didn't work properly anymore. Still, she would run her fingers softly over the keys, almost as if greeting an old friend no one ever noticed. And she preferred it that way. For her, those small moments were enough to remind her who she once was. Maria's life was simple, but it was not sad. She found joy in small things, in the way children laughed during afternoon classes, in the smell of coffee brewing in the office, and in the gentle evening breeze on her walk home. She liked watching the sunset paint the sky orange and pink, while she listened to faint tunes on her old radio. She often hummed along, her voice soft but steady. Music still lived in her heart, even if the world had forgotten her talent. Sometimes people joked that Maria never got tired. She was always the first to arrive and the last to leave. No matter how messy the hall became after events, she stayed until everything was spotless. "You're too dedicated," someone once said. She had smiled and replied quietly, "When you do something with love, it doesn't feel like work." Though life had not given her much comfort, Maria carried herself with dignity. She never complained, never asked for more, and always tried to see the good in others. Even when people were rude or dismissive, she chose patience over anger. Her strength was silent, not loud or proud, and that made it even more powerful. To the townspeople, Maria's story seemed ordinary, a woman who lived simply, worked hard, and kept to herself. But beneath that quiet surface lay memories, melodies, and emotions that few could imagine. Every time she cleaned around that broken piano, she felt a tug inside her chest, a whisper that said, "You still have it. You still can play." She ignored it most days, convincing herself that those times were gone. Yet deep inside there was a longing, not for fame or applause, but for the pure joy of playing again, of feeling her fingers glide across the keys, of letting music speak what words could not. It was a feeling she tried to bury under layers of routine and humility. But some things can never truly fade. The townspeople might have seen just a cleaner, but life had quietly written a richer story for Maria, one of sacrifice, hidden dreams, and quiet courage. She had accepted her role in the world with grace, believing that her time for music had ended long ago. But fate had a way of surprising even the most modest souls, and so each morning Maria continued her quiet routine, never knowing that soon, the world around her would see what she had kept hidden for so many years. Her hands, used to sweeping floors and wiping tables, would soon awaken something that would change how people saw her forever. Because sometimes, It takes only one unexpected moment for the ordinary to become extraordinary. The evening of the community event arrived like any other Friday. The small town buzzed with excitement. People loved these gatherings, a chance to laugh, perform, and forget their worries for a while. The community center, freshly cleaned and decorated with paper lanterns and streamers, looked brighter than usual. The smell of popcorn and fresh pastries filled the air, mixing with the faint sound of chatter and laughter echoing through the hall. Maria had come early as she always did, sweeping the floor, arranging chairs, and checking that the stage curtains were properly hung. She had no plans to stay long after her work. Her goal was simple: finish cleaning, maybe watch the performances for a few minutes, and then quietly slip out before the crowd got too noisy. But fate had other plans, hidden behind laughter and coincidence. By 7 o'clock, the hall was full. Children ran between rows of chairs, giggling as their parents scolded them gently. The local mayor stood at the front, greeting people and announcing the start of the talent night. The event was casual: a few singers, a magician, a poetry reader, and even a young boy showing off his juggling skills. The audience clapped for everyone, sometimes sincerely, sometimes just to be polite. Maria stood quietly at the side, near the refreshment table. Her hands were folded neatly, and her eyes followed each performer with quiet admiration. She always loved seeing others shine. It reminded her of how art could bring warmth to people's hearts. She didn't envy them, but a small ache tugged at her chest, the kind that comes from remembering something you once loved deeply. As the evening went on, a few young men, local workers who liked to joke around, started talking near the stage. They were laughing loudly, full of energy and a little too much confidence. One of them, noticing Maria nearby, grinned and said, "Hey Maria, you've been working all day. Why don't you give us a performance?" The others laughed. "Yeah, play something for us on that old piano." The piano stood in the corner, half hidden under a dusty cover. Its once polished wood had turned dull, and a few of the white keys were yellowed with age. Everyone in town knew it hadn't been tuned for years. It was mostly used as decoration, not as a real instrument anymore. The young men's suggestion was not serious, just a harmless joke. Or so they thought. Maria froze for a moment. Her heart gave a small jump. She looked at the piano, then at the group smiling at her. There was laughter in their eyes. Not cruelty, but not kindness either. She gave a shy smile and shook her head. "Oh no, I can't play anymore," she said softly, but they insisted, clapping their hands and cheering as if it were part of the night's entertainment. People nearby turned to watch, curious to see what would happen. "Come on, Maria," someone said from the back. "Show us what you've got." A few of the older women giggled, and the crowd began to chant lightly, "Play, play, play." The sound of their voices filled the hall, playful but also a little mocking. Maria felt her face grow warm. She wasn't angry, just embarrassed. Her instinct told her to walk away, but something deeper, a quiet whisper from her heart, told her to stay. She took a slow breath and walked toward the piano. Her steps were small, almost uncertain. Every sound of her shoes on the wooden floor seemed louder than it should. The room quieted a little as she reached the piano. She removed the cover carefully and brushed away some dust with her sleeve. Her hands hovered above the keys, remembering the feeling from long ago. Her fingers trembled slightly as she pressed one note. It gave a dull, flat sound. Someone laughed softly from the crowd. Maria smiled faintly, more to herself than to them. She sat down on the old wooden bench, adjusting her posture like someone who had done this many times before. The hall waited, expecting maybe a few clumsy notes, perhaps another round of laughter. The mayor leaned back in his chair. Children whispered, and the young men crossed their arms. Grinning, Maria looked down at the keys again. The broken piano looked almost sad, like a friend long forgotten. She ran her fingers across it gently, then took a deep breath. Her heart was pounding, not from fear but from something awakening inside her. Memories of music lessons, of her father's voice, of the dreams she once had, they all came rushing back. The first few notes were hesitant, uneven and slightly off tune. A couple of people chuckled again, but then something shifted. Maria straightened her back. Her hands moved with a bit more confidence. The laughter faded as the melody started to form. The broken piano began to breathe again. No one in the room expected what came next. Her fingers, though aged and roughened by years of cleaning, danced gracefully across the keys. The sound that filled the hall was not perfect, but it was full of soul. The kind of music that came not from skill alone, but from a life that had felt joy and sorrow, loss and love. The young men who had started the joke now stood silent. Eyes wide, one of them whispered, "Is that really her?" A few people in the back put down their cups. Drawn in by the music, even the children stopped whispering. The room felt heavy and light at the same time. Heavy with emotion, light with wonder. Maria lost herself in the song. Each note told a story, her story. Her movements were natural, almost graceful. As if time itself had paused to listen, the broken piano sang again. Not in perfection, but in truth, and in that truth, everyone in the hall heard something different. Regret, hope, love, or simply the beauty of the unexpected. When she finally stopped playing, the last note hung in the air like a secret. The hall was utterly silent. The same people who had laughed moments ago now stood still, some with tears in their eyes, some with soft smiles of disbelief. Maria looked up shyly, her face glowing in the warm light. "I guess it still remembers," she said softly. Patting the piano, the room erupted in applause. Real applause, not polite or forced, but the kind that comes from hearts truly moved. And in that simple moment, the cleaner who came to work quietly every day had become something else entirely. A woman who had reminded everyone that beauty can live even in forgotten corners, and that a little faith in yourself can turn a joke into a miracle. The piano stood in the corner of the community hall like an old soldier who had seen too many battles. Its wooden body was scarred and dull, the black paint chipped away in many places, revealing pale streaks of forgotten polish beneath. The golden letters of its brand name were faded, almost unreadable. Its lid creaked when opened, and a faint smell of dust and age rose from inside. For years it had been nothing more than decoration, a memory of better times. When the community center first opened decades ago, the piano had been its pride. Back then, local music teachers would bring children to practice on it, and people would gather on weekends to sing together. It had filled the hall with laughter, with melodies that echoed through the walls. But time had no mercy, and like many beautiful things, it was slowly forgotten. The strings had loosened. Some keys had gone silent, and a few had cracked along the edges. The tuning pins rusted slightly, making every note unpredictable. Sometimes, when the air grew humid, it refused to play certain keys altogether. The once smooth pedal now groaned whenever pressed. Still, it remained there, not out of usefulness, but out of memory when Maria sat before it that night. It was almost as if the piano itself woke up. For years it had stood in silence, ignored and untouched except by her gentle hands when she cleaned around it. Now, under the soft yellow lights of the hall, it had an audience again. After her unexpected performance, the people left the hall buzzing with excitement. Some talked about her talent, others about how the piano could still sound so magical. But for Maria, the moment lingered quietly in her mind long after everyone had gone home. She stayed behind that night pretending to tidy up. Though her heart only wanted one thing, to touch the keys again. She sat down once more, this time alone. The laughter and applause were gone, replaced by the hum of silence. She ran her fingers along the rough surface of the keys, whispering to herself, "You still remember, don't you?" The piano in its own way seemed to answer, a soft echo when she pressed a single note. She began to play again, slower this time. Each note sounded different in the empty hall, softer, more personal. The broken keys gave little thuds. The uneven tones formed their own strange harmony. Yet somehow it was beautiful, it was imperfect. But human, just like her, as she played, memories returned like gentle waves. She remembered sitting at another piano long ago, one that was shiny and new, her father sitting nearby smiling proudly as she practiced. She remembered the music school where she used to perform for small gatherings. The smell of chalk, the creak of wooden floors, the kind voice of her teacher saying, "You play with feeling, Maria. That's what matters most." But then came the years of silence. After her mother's illness, after the endless nights of work and care, the piano had disappeared from her life. There was no time for dreams, no time for melodies. Life became about duty, about survival. The girl who once played had slowly turned into a woman who swept floors and scrubbed tables. Her fingers still remembered, but her heart had grown quiet now. As she played on this broken piano, she felt that young girl returning, timid but alive. Each note carried a piece of her story: joy, pain, love, loss, and hope. The cracks in the piano seemed to blend with the cracks in her soul, and together they made something whole. The sound drifted out the open window. Into the cool night air, a few people walking home paused, listening without knowing who played. It was raw, imperfect music, but it touched something deep, for music, like truth, does not need perfection to move hearts. When Maria finished, she sat in silence. Her hands rested on the keys, trembling slightly. The hall was dim, the paper lanterns flickering as the candles inside melted low. She looked at the piano and smiled softly. "You're still alive," she whispered. "And maybe I am too." The next morning, when the center opened, a few people were still talking about her performance. "Can you believe that sound came from that old thing?" Someone said, pointing at the piano. Another replied, "Maybe it's not about the piano, maybe it's about who's playing it." Maria overheard them as she swept the floor, and though she said nothing, a small warmth bloomed in her heart. For the first time in years, she felt seen, not as a cleaner, but as someone who could make something beautiful. That feeling stayed with her all day, through the clatter of dishes, the chatter of children, the endless chores. Every sound seemed softer now, more musical, as if life itself had found a new rhythm. After work, she sat by the piano again, not to play this time, but to clean it carefully. She polished its wood, wiped each key gently, even the ones that didn't work. It was like caring for an old friend who had waited patiently to be remembered. She thought about asking if the center could get it repaired. Maybe with a little love it could sound even better. But then she smiled, thinking, it doesn't need to be perfect. Neither do I. As the sun set outside, the orange light fell across the piano's surface. Giving it a soft golden glow, Maria stood for a long time, watching it. She felt grateful, not for the applause, but for the chance to feel alive again. That night, before she left, she touched the piano one last time and whispered, "Thank you." The piano didn't answer, of course, but if anyone had been there to listen closely, they might have heard a faint echo, like a sigh, as if it too was grateful. Grateful to be played again, to be loved again, and from that day, the broken piano was never just an old piece of furniture anymore. It became a symbol of something greater, that beauty, no matter how damaged, can still sing. If only someone believes in it enough to try. The next evening, the town still buzzed about what had happened at the community center. People couldn't stop talking about the quiet cleaner who had played the piano like a professional. Some said they had never heard music like that before. Others said it was just luck. But no matter what they thought, everyone agreed on one thing: Maria was no ordinary woman. At the community center, things looked the same. Yet something felt different. The old piano, once ignored, had become the main attraction. Children pressed its keys curiously, giggling when they made noise. Teenagers tried to imitate what Maria had played, only to produce a storm of wrong notes. Even the staff treated the piano more gently, covering it at night as if it were something precious. Maria, however, tried to keep her distance. She continued her work as always, sweeping, mopping, dusting, pretending nothing had changed. But inside her, a strange restlessness had begun to grow. Every time she passed the piano, her heart beat a little faster. Her fingers twitched slightly, as if they were begging to touch the keys again. The volunteers teased her kindly. "When will you give us another concert, Maria?" one asked. She smiled politely and replied, "Oh, that was just for fun, nothing more," another said. "Come on. You can't hide that talent forever." She shook her head, pretending to laugh, but her eyes lowered shyly. She didn't like attention. It made her uncomfortable. For many years, Maria had lived quietly in the background. She had learned to blend into the rhythm of everyday life. Work, rest, repeat. To suddenly stand in the center of people's attention felt strange. Almost wrong. She wasn't used to it, and part of her didn't believe she deserved it. That night, when everyone had gone home, Maria stayed behind again to clean. The hall was empty. Only the soft hum of the old ceiling fan broke the silence. The piano sat under its dusty cover. Waiting, she walked past it several times. Each time slowing down just a little, her heart whispered, "Play." But her mind said, "No, it's better not to." Finally, she stopped in front of it. She looked around, no one was there. The moonlight slipped in through the window, landing softly on the piano lid. She smiled and pulled off the cover, brushing her hand over the smooth, cool surface. Just one song, she whispered to herself. When her fingers touched the keys, she felt that old electricity again, that spark she hadn't felt in years. She began to play softly, almost afraid of her own sound. The melody was gentle like a lullaby. It was something she had written herself long ago, back when she was young and hopeful, back when she believed her music could change her life. But after a few minutes, she stopped suddenly. Her hands froze in midair. A heavy feeling filled her chest. She looked at her reflection in the piano's shiny surface and whispered, "Who am I kidding?" Her voice cracked slightly. "I'm just a cleaner now." She closed the lid gently, as if afraid to wake something she had put to sleep for too long. A tear rolled down her cheek. She wiped it quickly, embarrassed even though no one was there to see. "Dreams are for other people," she murmured, "not for me." The next morning, Maria came to work early. She acted normal, smiling and greeting people, but something inside her had dimmed again. She threw herself into her cleaning, moving faster than usual, as if trying to scrub away the feelings from the night before. Later that day, a little girl named Emma came running into the hall with her mother. Emma had seen Maria play the other night and had been talking about it nonstop. She ran up to Maria, holding a small paper flower she had made. "This is for you," the girl said with a bright smile. "Because you make the piano happy." Maria knelt down and took the paper flower carefully. Her eyes softened. "Thank you, sweetheart," she said. "That's very kind of you," Emma giggled. "Will you play again?" "I want to hear the happy song." Maria hesitated. She looked toward the piano. Then back at the child's hopeful face, she smiled faintly. "Maybe another time," she said gently. Emma pouted but nodded, skipping away. Her small voice echoed as she said, "I'll wait." That simple moment stayed in Maria's heart long after the girl had left. Those innocent words, "I'll wait," made her think deeply. Maybe her music wasn't just for her. Maybe it was meant to bring happiness to others too. Yet still fear held her back, the fear of being seen, of failing, of hoping too much that evening. As the sun dipped below the hills, Maria stood outside the community hall, watching the sky turn shades of orange and gold. The wind carried faint sounds from the town. Laughter, footsteps, the clinking of dishes. Life moved on as always, but Maria felt caught between two worlds. The life she had, and the life she had once dreamed of. When she finally went back inside to lock up, she glanced once more at the piano. It seemed to glow softly in the fading light, almost as if it were calling her. She sighed and whispered, "Maybe tomorrow." Then she turned off the lights and left. That night, lying in her small room above the bakery, Maria couldn't sleep. The melody she had played echoed in her mind. It was as if the music refused to let her rest. She turned on her side, staring at the moonlight spilling across the wall, and wondered, what if I tried again? What if this is my second chance? But then she shook her head and smiled sadly. "No, Maria, don't be foolish," she whispered. "You're too old for dreams." Still, as she closed her eyes, her fingers moved slightly against the blanket, tracing invisible piano keys, and somewhere deep inside her, a quiet voice whispered back, "It's never too late." The night of the next event arrived quietly. The community center glowed under the warm lights that spilled out from its windows. Outside, the streets were calm, the air cool, and the faint hum of laughter floated from the hall. Inside, people gathered once again, a mix of locals, families, and curious visitors who had heard whispers of a woman who played like magic. Maria was there too, of course, though she hadn't planned to stay long. She was cleaning up after the children's art show earlier that evening. Moving between tables with her mop and cloth, she kept her head down, pretending not to hear when people talked about that moment last week when the cleaner made the piano sing. She told herself she didn't want attention, but deep down her heart beat a little faster each time someone mentioned her name. She had spent nights thinking about that moment, how it felt to touch the keys again, to hear music come alive under her hands. She had tried to push it away, but music had a way of returning, like a scent carried by the wind. The piano still sat in the same corner, but it looked different now. Someone had placed a small vase of flowers on top of it, and the dust was gone. It seemed brighter, almost alive, as if it too had been waiting. Maria glanced at it as she wiped a nearby table, and a strange feeling stirred inside her. Half fear, half longing. A group of people gathered near the stage, setting up for the next part of the evening, an open mic where anyone could perform. The host, a friendly young man named Daniel, noticed Maria working quietly and smiled. "Hey, Maria, he called. You joining us tonight? The crowd laughed softly. Remembering last time, Maria laughed too, shaking her head. No, not tonight, she said, waving her hand. I'm just cleaning like always. But Daniel wasn't convinced. Come on, the piano's waiting for you, he said. Everyone wants to hear you again. The crowd cheered lightly, clapping and calling her name. Maria felt her cheeks burn. She laughed nervously. You're all too kind, but really I shouldn't. The room echoed with friendly voices. Urging her to play, she looked around, so many faces smiling at her. Expecting something she wasn't sure she could give again, her heart began to race. The piano seemed to look back at her, silent and patient. Like an old friend waiting to be remembered. For a moment she wanted to run, to escape the pressure of their eyes, but then she heard a small voice from the back. It was Emma, the little girl from before. She was standing on her chair, waving. Please, Miss Maria, play the happy song, she said. Maria's heart melted. She smiled at the child, then looked at the piano once more. The fear began to fade, replaced by something softer. Courage. She took a deep breath and walked slowly toward the piano. The sound of her shoes on the wooden floor filled the hall, and the chatter quieted. She sat down carefully, her hands resting on her lap for a moment. The old piano creaked under her weight. She looked at it lovingly, whispering, Let's try again, old friend. Then she lifted her hands to the keys. The first sound that came out was soft, almost shy. The piano groaned slightly, its broken notes still there. Uneven and uncertain, a few people chuckled gently. But Maria didn't mind. She closed her eyes, inhaled deeply, and began again. Her fingers moved slowly at first, searching for the rhythm, finding the hidden voice within the instrument. Then something shifted. The laughter died down as her playing grew stronger. The melody began to form, rising and falling like a gentle tide. The sound filled the hall, imperfect but beautiful, rich with emotion. Her hands moved with confidence now. Not trained, but remembered. Each note seemed to tell a story. It was not a practiced song. It was born in the moment, from her memories, her struggles, her love for music, and the life she had lived. It carried the weight of her silence and the joy of her rediscovery. The audience leaned forward, drawn in. The broken keys didn't matter anymore. Somehow they made the music more real. Maria was lost in it. She forgot the people, the lights, the hall. Everything faded except the sound and the feeling flowing through her. Her fingers danced freely, gracefully, as if they were guided by something greater than memory. It was as though all the years of hiding had led to this, one pure moment of truth. When she finally reached the end of her song, the last note trembled in the air. The hall was completely still. For a few seconds, no one moved. The silence was so deep it felt sacred. Then slowly the applause began, soft at first, then growing louder until the entire hall was clapping, cheering, standing. Maria blinked in surprise. Her heart pounded. She smiled shyly, her eyes wet with tears. Thank you, she whispered. But her voice was lost in the sound of the crowd. Daniel came up beside her, smiling wide. Maria, that was incredible, he said. She laughed softly, shaking her head. It's just a song, she replied. No, he said gently. It's much more than that. It's your heart. Emma ran to her and hugged her tightly. You made the piano happy again, the little girl said. Maria knelt down, hugging her back. Maybe it made me happy too, she whispered. As the crowd slowly left the hall, Maria stayed behind once more. The lights dimmed, the noise faded, and she was alone with the piano again. She placed her hand on the keys and smiled. You and I, she said softly. We still have music left in us outside. The night was calm. A light drizzle began to fall. The sound of raindrops against the windows mixed with the faint echo of her melody. Maria walked home slowly, her steps light, her heart full. For the first time in years, she felt alive, truly alive. And as the rain washed the streets clean, the world seemed a little brighter. Not because the storm had passed, but because somewhere in a small town, a simple woman had found her song again. After that second performance, something in Maria's life began to change quietly, like the first light of dawn slipping through a window. Nothing around her looked different. The same small town, the same community hall, the same old piano, and yet inside her something had awakened. Something that had been asleep for far too long. People in the town started to see her differently. The woman they had once passed by without a second glance now had a new kind of glow. When she walked to the market, people greeted her warmly. Some stopped to tell her how her music had touched them. A few even asked if she could teach their children. Maria smiled shyly and said she was no teacher, but the warmth in their eyes made her heart feel full. The community center felt more alive than ever. Visitors began coming more often, asking to see the piano, to hear Maria play again. Daniel, the event host, suggested that they organize a small evening concert. Just for the town, he said. You don't have to make it big. Just something beautiful. Maria laughed nervously. A concert? Me? She asked. I'm not anyone special. Daniel shook his head with a smile. That's where you're wrong, Maria. Special isn't about fame. It's about heart. For the first time in her life, she began to believe that maybe he was right. She started to come to the center earlier, not just to clean but to play, sometimes in the quiet mornings before anyone arrived. She'd uncover the piano and let her fingers explore the keys. The sound was uneven, full of scratches and cracks, but somehow it carried more emotion than any perfect instrument could. Music began to color her days. When she swept the floor, she hummed softly. When she mopped the stage, she tapped the rhythm with her foot. Even her walk home felt different, lighter, slower, as if she was in step with a melody only she could hear. One afternoon, as she was playing, Emma entered the hall with her mother. The little girl sat cross-legged on the floor, eyes wide with wonder. You sound like the sky, she said suddenly. Maria laughed softly. Like the sky? She asked. Yes, Emma said seriously. Sometimes you sound like sunshine and sometimes like rain. Maria smiled and nodded. That's a good kind of music then, she said gently. The news of Maria's music began to spread beyond the small town. One evening, a journalist from a nearby city came to interview her. He had heard the story of the cleaner who played the broken piano. Maria felt shy, sitting before his camera. Her hands rested on her knees as she said quietly, I didn't mean to surprise anyone, I just played from my heart. The man smiled. That's exactly why people love it, he said. The article came out the following week. The headline read, Ordinary Woman, Extraordinary Music. It told her story of how she had given up her dream long ago and rediscovered it by chance. People began visiting the community center from nearby towns, not to see something perfect, but to feel something real. The hall became a place of quiet magic. Whenever Maria played, the audience sat in silence, listening not just with their ears, but with their hearts. The broken piano, once ignored, had become the soul of the room. Its imperfect notes blended beautifully with her emotion. Together they told stories no words could capture. But Maria didn't play for fame. She didn't even care about the attention. For her, the music was a prayer, a way of remembering who she was and what she had survived. When her fingers touched the keys, she wasn't just playing, she was healing. One evening, as the sun set outside, the hall was nearly empty. Maria sat alone again at the piano. She began to play a soft, slow tune, something she had written herself that week. The melody rose gently, filling the air with warmth. It was full of gratitude. Gratitude for second chances, for the people who had believed in her, for the piano that had waited all these years as she played. She remembered all the versions of herself, the little girl full of dreams, the tired woman scrubbing floors, the quiet one who hid from the world. They all seemed to sit beside her, smiling. And she realized something, and music had never left her. It had simply waited until she was ready to return. When the song ended, Maria looked up and saw Daniel standing by the door. Listening quietly, his eyes were bright. You've changed, he said softly. You're not the same woman who used to sweep this floor. Maria smiled gently. Maybe I haven't changed, she said. Maybe I just remembered who I was. That night, as she walked home under the stars, Maria felt a peace she hadn't felt in years. The streetlights glowed softly. The night breeze brushed her face. She looked up and whispered, Thank you. Though she wasn't sure who she was thanking. Maybe the universe, maybe life itself. The next morning, she brought a small jar of wildflowers from her window and placed them on the piano. For you, she said with a smile. You're the reason I found myself again. The sunlight fell across the instrument, and for a brief second, it looked golden, almost new. From that day forward, Maria was no longer just the cleaner. She was the heart of the community center, the woman who turned a broken piano into a miracle. And though her fingers sometimes trembled and the keys still stuck here and there, together they made something that perfection never could. Music that came from the soul, and every time she played, People didn't just hear the song, they felt it. They felt the story of a woman who had found her light again, not in fame, not in riches, but in courage, kindness, and the simple truth that even broken things can still create beauty if they are loved enough. Weeks passed, and Maria's name began to travel beyond her small town. People came not because they expected a grand concert, but because they wanted to feel something real. They wanted to witness the woman who had made a broken piano sound alive again. Every performance was different. Sometimes her music was joyful, like sunlight dancing through leaves. Sometimes it was full of longing, like rain on an empty street. But no matter what she played, her songs always reached people's hearts. They left the hall smiling or quietly wiping their eyes, not sure why her simple music moved them so deeply. Maria herself couldn't fully explain it. She only knew that when she played, she felt whole. It was as if every scar, every pain, every lonely night had turned into sound, and that sound healed her one afternoon, after a small performance. An old man approached her. He was dressed neatly, carrying a walking stick. His eyes were gentle but sharp. "You play beautifully," he said. "Your music reminds me of something, or maybe someone." Maria smiled politely. "Thank you, sir," she said. "I only play what I feel." The man nodded thoughtfully. "Did you ever study music formally?" he asked. Maria hesitated. She rarely spoke about her past, but something about his kind voice made her answer honestly. "Yes," she said softly. "A long time ago. I used to play in a small school. My teacher said I had potential, but life had other plans." The man studied her face, then smiled. "Life always has plans," he said gently. "Sometimes it just waits for us to listen again." He left after that, but his words stayed with her. That night Maria couldn't sleep. She sat by her window looking at the moon. Her thoughts drifted back to her younger self, sitting at a piano in a quiet classroom, her teacher's patient smile, the dreams she once had of playing on real stages. What would he say if he saw me now? She wondered the next day, as she arrived at the community center. Daniel met her at the door. "Maria," he said excitedly. "You won't believe this. A reporter from the city wants to film your story. They're coming next week. They want to record you playing." Maria froze. "Me?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Why me? I'm not famous. I'm not even trained anymore." Daniel shook his head. "That's exactly why, Maria. They want to show people what real music means." Maria felt nervous but strangely calm. She wasn't sure she was ready to let the world see her. Yet a small part of her, the part that still dreamed, whispered, "Maybe it's time." The day of the recording arrived. The hall was decorated with candles and fresh flowers. The piano had been gently cleaned and repaired just enough to sound clear. Maria wore a simple white dress and her hair tied back neatly. Her hands trembled as the camera crew set up their lights. "Are you ready?" the reporter asked kindly. Maria smiled nervously. "I'll try my best," she said when she sat at the piano. The world around her seemed to fade away. The lights, the camera, the people, they all disappeared. There was only her and the piano, her heart and the music. She began to play slowly. The same melody she had played that first night, the one that had changed everything. But this time it sounded different. Deeper, fuller, it carried all her memories, all her pain, all her joy. Each note seemed to say something, to reveal something she had never spoken out loud. And then halfway through the song, something unexpected happened. The old man from the audience weeks before stepped into the hall quietly. He stood near the back watching her. When she finished playing, tears shimmered in his eyes. He walked toward her slowly, leaning on his cane. "Maria," he said softly, "you may not remember me, but I was once your teacher." Maria gasped. Her hand flew to her mouth. "Mr. Anton?" she whispered. The man nodded, smiling warmly. "Yes, my dear. I never forgot you. You had a gift, one I always believed would return someday." Tears filled Maria's eyes. "I thought I disappointed you," she said in a trembling voice. "I had to leave school so suddenly I never got to say goodbye." Mr. Anton shook his head. "You never disappointed me, Maria. Life doesn't erase talent. It only hides it until the heart is ready again, and tonight, I saw the same spark I saw all those years ago." The room was silent, everyone watching the tender reunion. Maria reached out and held his hand. "Thank you," she whispered, "for believing in me. Even when I forgot to believe in myself." The cameras had captured everything, not just the music, but the truth behind it. When the video was released, it spread quickly across the internet. Millions of people watched the story of the simple woman and her broken piano. They watched her tears, her humility, her courage, and her music. But the most beautiful part wasn't the fame. It was what happened after. Letters began arriving from people everywhere, young musicians, elderly listeners, even children, all saying how her story had inspired them. "You made me believe that it's never too late," one letter said. "You reminded me to try again," said another. Maria read each letter slowly, her heart swelling with emotion. She realized that her music had done what she never expected. It had reached beyond her town, beyond her own pain, and touched the hearts of strangers who needed hope. That night, sitting once more by the piano, she whispered softly, "So this is what music was meant for, not to impress, but to heal." Her fingers pressed a single note, and she smiled in that moment. Maria finally understood the real meaning of her gift. It wasn't about talent or fame or perfect notes. It was about connection, the invisible thread that ties one soul to another through sound. And as the night deepened outside, she began to play again, softly, peacefully, not for the world, not for the applause, but for the little girl she once was, the one who had dreamed of this moment all her life. The weeks after the video's release felt like a dream for Maria. The world she had once known, small, quiet, predictable, had suddenly opened wide. Letters kept arriving at the community center. Some came from nearby towns, others from faraway countries. Many were handwritten, some typed, all carrying the same message: gratitude, hope, and admiration. Maria read them every evening after work, sitting by the same piano that had changed her life. She read stories of people who had once given up on their dreams, but were trying again because of her. A man wrote that he had pulled his old guitar out of storage after 20 years. A young girl said she had signed up for piano lessons even though her family couldn't afford it. "You made me believe it's okay to start again," she wrote. Maria would smile softly, her eyes glistening. "If my music can do that," she whispered, "then it was worth everything." The town itself began to change too. The community center was no longer just a place for small gatherings. It became a symbol of second chances. People began donating money to restore the old piano. A local carpenter repaired the wood. A tuner came to fix the keys. Even the mayor visited, promising to create a Music for All program in Maria's honor. The night the piano was fully restored, the entire town gathered once again. The hall glowed with warm lights, and the air was filled with excitement. Children ran between chairs laughing, while old friends hugged and shared stories. In the corner stood the piano, polished, shining, its keys perfectly aligned once more. It looked brand new, yet it carried all the history and love of the years before. Maria stood near the entrance, dressed in a soft blue dress. Her heart fluttered as she watched everyone smile and talk. She still found it hard to believe that all this had begun because of her, because of a joke that turned into something beautiful. Daniel walked over and said, "They're all waiting for you, Maria." "It's your night," she smiled nervously. "I never thought I'd say this, but I'm nervous," Daniel grinned. "Good. That means it matters." As she walked to the piano, the room fell silent. Every step echoed softly. When she reached the bench, she took a moment to look at the keys. Her reflection shimmered faintly on their surface. She smiled. "Hello again," she whispered. She began to play, and from the first note, the room seemed to breathe. The piano sang clearly now. No broken notes, no creaks. The sound was warm and full. It carried through every corner of the hall, wrapping everyone in a gentle calm. The melody was new, something she had written just for this night. It spoke of forgiveness, of rediscovery, of life's quiet miracles. People closed their eyes as she played. Some swayed softly, some wiped away tears. Even the children stood still, as if sensing something sacred. The air felt heavy with emotion, yet light with peace as the final notes faded. Maria lifted her hands slowly. The silence that followed was deep, powerful. Then came the applause, loud, joyful, endless. People stood, clapping, cheering, calling her name. Maria's eyes filled with tears. She pressed her hands to her heart, whispering, "Thank you," over and over. When the noise finally settled, Maria stood and spoke softly. "This piano was broken once," she said, "just like I was. But someone believed it could sing again, and it did. Maybe we're all like that, a little cracked, a little tired, but never truly beyond repair. We just need someone or something to remind us that we can still make music. The crowd fell silent, then burst into applause again. But this time it wasn't just for the song. It was for her courage, her humility, her heart. After the event ended, people stayed to thank her personally. Emma, the little girl, ran up and hugged her tightly. "You did it, Miss Maria," she said. "You fixed the piano." Maria laughed softly, hugging her back. "No, sweetheart," she whispered. "The piano fixed me." Later that night, when the hall was empty and the lights were dim, Maria sat at the piano one last time. The moonlight poured through the windows. Lighting her face in silver, she touched the keys gently, not to play, but just to feel them. "We did it," she murmured. "You and I." She thought about everything that had happened. The laughter, the music, the people, her teacher, the letters, the love. It all felt unreal. But it was real. It was hers. She realized something then. Her story had never been about becoming famous or being noticed. It had been about coming home to herself. Music had always been her truth, her prayer, her way of surviving. And though her journey had taken her far from it, fate had found a way to bring her back. Not through perfection, but through imperfection. Through something broken that taught her how to be whole again. Outside, the world was quiet. The stars twinkled above, and the faint sound of wind rustled the trees. Maria closed her eyes, smiled, and began to play softly. One last melody before heading home. The notes floated out the window, carried into the night, finding their way into hearts she would never meet, somewhere far away. Someone might have heard it faintly. A tune that felt familiar, comforting, like a whisper saying, "It's never too late." And when the final note faded into silence, Maria stood, covered the piano gently, and whispered, "Thank you." Before turning off the lights as she walked out into the cool night air, she didn't feel ordinary anymore. She didn't feel small. She felt alive because now she knew, beyond all doubt, that even the simplest person, with the kindest heart and a broken piano, could fill the world with music that would never be forgotten.